Watergate, the worst political scandal in American history, finally destroys Richard Nixon. The president who opened new doors to Russia and China quits the White House in disgrace. He resigned rather than face impeachment for ordering illegal acts.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
2 years before he resigned, the president's re-election committee had broken into his opponent's headquarters in search of damaging intelligence.
There was pressure from the White House, from me, and from the president to the committee to get their campaign intelligence activity going.
The break-in team were caught, and the White House launched the cover-up that ruined Nixon.
The staff itself was not doing very much as a matter of individual initiative. They were carrying out Richard Nixon's instructions day to day.
Nixon's closest advisors now give evidence that the Watergate break-in was just one in a series of crimes instigated by the president himself. In May 1970, President Nixon's America was in uproar. He had won election, pledged to end the war in Vietnam, but now he escalated it. Thousands of demonstrators laid siege to the White House.
At 4:30 in the morning, I found myself in the Secret Service command post in the old executive office building. And then, just out of the blue, out of a loudspeaker, comes the message sort of crackling through that Searchlight is on the lawn. Well, that just hit me as hard as it can hit you, because that tells you the president is outside the mansion, he's out on the lawn, and it's 4:30 in the morning. He doesn't belong out there.
It was not a good time to have a president on the loose. Earlier that week at Kent State University, 4 students had been shot dead by the National Guard. Nixon feared that a war the Democrats had got the country into would cost him his re-election.
There was just an eruption of fury around the country, a lot of young people descending on Washington. And so we had to move quickly to try to figure out, how do we protect the White House? How do we protect the city? The idea was raised, well, maybe we should just, like they did in the Old West, circle the covered wagons and protect it that way.
Behind the barricade of buses, the president tried to defuse the situation before the big demo. He called a press conference in time to reach the students driving to Washington.
Would you be seated?
Nixon, who had treated the anti-war movement as traitors, now changed his tune.
What do you think the students are trying to say in this demonstration?
They're trying to say that they want to stop the killing. They're trying to say that they want to end the draft. They're trying to say that we ought to get out of Vietnam. I agree with everything that they're trying to accomplish.
After his press conference, the president was restless, worrying about how his new line had been received. At 4 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep, and it was then that the White House aide on duty heard that Searchlight was on the lawn.
I immediately put a call through to John Ehrlichman and said, the president is outside, not sure what's going on.
Bud Krogh called me in the middle of the night, woke me up to say that the president was moving and that he appeared to be intent on going out to the mall to hobnob with the protesters and students and the others who were gathered there. And what should he do?
He said, go over and render assistance immediately.
The president made for the Lincoln Memorial. There, at the foot of the steps, Bud Krogh caught up with him.
The president was directly engaged in conversation with a number of young people who were wearing combat clothes, peace symbols, long hair.
He just kept rambling, and he'd go from city to city, and then he'd stop on a city, and if he thought of a sport in that city, he'd start talking about it. You know, like he got to California, and he thought of surfing, so then that stopped him, and he'd look up and say, are there any surfers? And then he'd start talking about surfing.
Krogh nervously maneuvered the president back into the car, but Nixon insisted on continuing his tour.
Just about that time, I guess you could say the cavalry arrived. We had the top White House staff. I was very relieved to see them.
I was concerned that we know exactly what the president had said and what the kids had said, so that we had some basis for admitting or denying what took place.
The president said, now let's all walk back to the White House. And I had to explain to him that he couldn't walk back to the White House. The White House was barricaded by buses, and we wouldn't be able to get in, even though he had a pretty good ID card.
The president's gesture of conciliation failed. Nixon now struck back at the anti-war movement. He demanded to know who was behind the protesters, who was funding them. He called a rare summit meeting of his intelligence chiefs.
He ordered the heads of each of the government intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. There was a group of, I think, 6 or 8 men gathered in the Oval Office, and I was there. And the president, he really took the bark off. He laid it out to them that he was fed up with the bickering between the intelligence groups and between the directors themselves.
The net of this was that President Nixon wanted very much to get more information, and if he could just lay his hands on some foreign element that was supporting this activism, then he would have a good political axe with which to wage his own domestic war.
The president issued a secret executive order. It gave the intelligence agencies a free hand to bug telephones, open mail, and break into private homes and offices, overriding legal safeguards on citizens' rights. These new powers to spy on Americans at home were, in fact, outside the law.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. If, for example, the president approves something because of a threat to internal peace and order of significant magnitude, then the president's decision in that instance is one that enables those who carry it out to carry it out without violating a law.
Their goal is
the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, balked at this doctrine of the divine right of presidents.
Loyalty rests. I realize that
Hoover had outlasted 7 of Nixon's predecessors in his 45 years in the job. In the twilight of his career, he was not prepared to risk his empire. He knew there would be hell to pay if the president's order leaked out.
It was just then allowed to die. In other words, it was never implemented. But it was allowed to die because Mr. Hoover simply dug his heels in and refused to cooperate.
Nixon decided the White House would have to do its own dirty work. To recruit their first undercover operative, he had dispatched John Ehrlichman to New York.
He arrived at LaGuardia on a Washington plane with an entourage of assistants. Typical, you know, everybody had attaché cases, leather cases, newspapers, bulky papers under their arms, and I stood by waiting, and finally Mr. Ehrlichman, very officious, made it known he wished to interview with me in connection with taking an assignment with the President of the United States.
So for political things, for personal things, things that were non-governmental, we used Ulasewicz, and we paid him.
Mr. Ehrlichman said that should it be disclosed, or should it come out, leak out or whatever, that I was on working for the White House, it would be denied.